Palace at 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, hour number 2 here, live in the Old Pueblo. I sit here today in the studios of PowerTalk 1210, totally humbled and awed. Awed by my adherence to the musicians and those who produced it and cultivated the music. Much of the focus of my show, I now realize, is on the ability to have people in a room all at the same time making music. It seems simple, but in these times, it's not. Those who know how to mic a set of Michael Shrieve or Billy Kreutzman drums, being able to remember his name because it's on the inside gatefold, along with about a dozen other heady individualists, hell-bent on creating music. This music comes out of their instruments, but it's the sound of the record that provides space and time displacement. The Erie Jews harp trying to get traction in the rain. That's where my guest's launching point was, and he has continued into the digital age with timeless artists like David Crosby and new writers of a different age. Larry Graham coming in right on time in the Valley of the Moon. My guest deftly made his way in and around the weeds with Brewer and Shipley, carving paths of Kama Sutra, while Bill Vitt and John Kahn laid down rhythm tracks, or building a custom designed studio in Bob Weir's Mill Valley home. My guest is not awed by the digital age. In fact, he's thrived in it because of the relationships he's built when music came out of communities. Deeds, not words. Stephen Barncard, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, thank you, Jake. I might ask Oscar to trim the sound up to my end here a little bit higher up. I could barely hear you, so I want to make sure I get your questions. And good afternoon.
Well, it's an honor to talk to you, and we'll make sure that you can hear me. I wanted you to talk. I wanted you to talk a little bit about when you were first coming up as an engineer. Could have been when you were, even before you became a full-fledged engineer. But how music really came out of these communals opportunities, and juxtapose that to what is happening in the digital world today.
Okay. Well, it was very hard to amass any kind of recording equipment that sounded worth anything unless you just put up two mics. And I did some live recording like that. I did have a stereo recorder early in my experiments with audio, but my first recorder was mono, of course. It was back in 1960, 59 or so. My dad bought me this really cheap machine, but it gave me insight into the theory and so forth. So there was still a lot of setting up, and, tape would always run out. So catching the moment would require making sure you had money to buy tape, or you had a lot of used tape around, and then, of course, you had the problems with used tape. But and you want me to compare that to how it could happen today? It's so much easier to record. You have infinite recording time and size, really. You can record at 192K if you really feel so inclined, and for hours at a time. A 64 gig chip on a even simple handheld recorder costs like $35 now. So
I think I was referring, I was referring more to the idea. I have to tell you, it is really such a high honor to talk to you, because one of the albums that I've just been that has been channeling me on this journey has been If I Could Only Remember My Name, and it has to do with the sound of that album. And when you look at before the new year, I looked at all the guys on that album, and I said, okay, I've already gotten to Yorma, and I know I'm missing somebody else, but then I was like, I got to Shrieve, and I never expected to get to you, man. But I said, that's a community. They were a community of musicians that made music together. That's more what I'm getting at, is that you hear the warmth in that record, man. That record is, I don't know. Take me through that record. I mean, is it a fantasy, or was everybody in there? I know everybody wasn't all the tracks together, but everybody was generally there supporting each other, and that's the communal music I was talking about.
Well, I guess my main takeaway from those sessions was that it was the lack of pretense. David had just finished a big hit, the CSNY album. He was over his sorrow at the losing of his girlfriend, and probably future wife, because she was the one, Christine. But he had this whole bag of songs that the other bands rejected or weren't just right for that, or incomplete in various stages. So he sat down and just bought studio time with no agenda. 7 to 11 every night, no all-nighters. He had had enough of that with CSNY and Stills going on and on and on. He set the stage. David, first of all, is probably one of the greatest producers of this kind of music because he's an artist, himself, and been in the studio a lot, and he knows how to make people feel comfortable, and he knows when they've hit their performance peak, which sometimes the first or second take, and sometimes, I got to do another one, and say, nope, stop, and he did that. He did that a lot. So this was a very David-centered record, and everybody came. There was no call for players because all these sessions were going on at the same time. This is something that can't happen anymore with home studios, is that there was a lot of activity with 3 different full-size tracking rooms in the middle of San Francisco, with the first professional and major league studio in San Francisco, starting in 1969 and going on to, and still that place exists today, believe it or not. I just did a project last year.
Wow.
In those same rooms, which have not changed. There's a bit of magic in the studio itself, just the size of the room and so forth. But the fact that all those people were there and could walk in, and they were friends of David already, and I think Garcia was in another room starting his solo album, and of course the Jefferson Starship had a long-term deal. I think they bought a year at a time. They bought out Studio A, locked it out because they didn't want any more interruptions. Because at the time, most of the studio time was booked. If you didn't lock it, there were no lockouts.
Right.
People didn't usually do that until Airplane had a all-you-could-eat kind of deal in their contract where they could have as much studio time. I don't think they really looked at the bottom line, how that worked out later, but they were said, take as much time as you want, and that what eventually extended into Grunt Records and their own label and so forth.
Talking to Stephen, I wanted to ask you, as it relates to that album, the track we fused into this interview was Mount Tamalpais High, and
right.
Can you, there are so many intricate songs, Laughing, Traction in the Rain with that beautiful harp. Can you talk about your major, did you have ideas for that album, and more broadly, do you consider yourself a good problem solver?
Well, on that album, the forces of good was with me somehow. Actually, I did not want to do that record at first. When David called me, I said, I'm not going to want to do it. I tell him to go away. Because during Deja Vu, he was incredibly rude to me and put me down because I was an assistant, kind of an underling thing. And it wasn't personal, really. It was just he was lashing out. So, and I'd always wanted to record David. I mean, I loved him when he did the weird stuff in the Birds and so forth. But
sure.
He continued to call me. He insisted, and said, he said, I'll make it worth your while, was his hope. So I said, oh, okay, I'll do it. And, my girlfriend was kind of wary of him, because he did have the roving eye, and he, some girls, just fall madly in love with him, and many girls, down-to-earth ladies, are pretty suspicious. He's got that roving eye, with David, But he must have talked to Jerry or someone because in the Dead, because he wanted me. He must have liked American Beauty the way it sounded, and it was we can talk about that later on. It was an acoustic guitar festival, and acoustic guitars have been kind of my holy grail up until that point. Anyway, I'd never found too many people that could really play acoustic guitar anywhere, had good sounding guitars, until I ran into this cat named in Kansas City, back before I left for the coast. His name was Chet Nichols. He was a troubadour of the first sort, very much like Crosby. I would call him sort of a male representation of the Joni Mitchell sound. He had, but also with guitar skills like John Fahey.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
I mean, he had this multiple picking style that sounded like three people playing.
Unbelievable.
So he had these beautiful Guild guitars, and so that gave me, because I did that record for Chet Nichols on spec, about 3 months or so before Crosby's record, I had an experimentation platform to try out different miking techniques. And so stereo miking on guitar, on acoustic guitars, which I'd always wanted to do. I never had enough good microphones to do it before. And here I had 16 tracks, a singer, you know, I did stereo vocals, everything, and got to experiment and got all that stuff out of the way so that when I got to Crosby, I not only had a more focused idea about what to do, how to record an acoustic guitar, I also had an idea about the social skills necessary to get people to produce people, to, you know, get them on to the next step. And
Right.
problem solve, as you say, to get to the next stage of the recording. So Chet helped me immensely. I'm helping him actually remixing that first record because I made a lot of mistakes. So I feel like I owe it to the guy to redo those mixes. And I have the basic track. I'm fortunate enough to have the multi-tracks to do that. But that record was just fantastic. It was a learning experience as well as absolute joy. Every night brought a surprise. You never knew who was going to walk in. One night we had, I think Bernie Krause walked in with a bunch of synthesizers stuff and these two techs and set up this machine that was supposed to track Crosby's voice, and it never worked. But, you know, Crosby he liked gadgets, you know, much like McGuinn did. So.
This is just fantastic. You know, I wanted to go back a little before when you were, I read somewhere that you were, you assisted on War's first album. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk about that experience? I mean, early on, I love, part of my show is just sort of, you know, I don't want to say it's a before you were famous kind of thing, but it's the idea of saying before you really trusted your gut, before you knew exactly who you were, one of these early sessions when you were an assistant, when you went with your gut, you made a right suggestion, a right call that ended a blockage, allowed things to flow, and really put you on the course where you wound up today.
I was a real good assistant. I had also fortunate to have to assist some really heavy dudes like Bill Halverson, like Glenn Johns,
Right.
Like Chris Huston on the War sessions. Now, Jerry Goldstein is I don't know if you've he would be a great interview.
I need him. He was a hand clapper during some Tim Buckley sessions, I think.
He's been everywhere. He was a Brill Building original. He was a producer. He was one of those guys, and he's still around.
Oh.
You know, he's been in kind of like the dark side of the music business sometimes, and I don't know. I don't want to say anything.
It's all good.
You know, some of those paychecks arrived late and so forth, but you know. But he's such a funny, engaging, wonderful guy. You can take it, you can love it, because he represents kind of like one of the last of the old school guys. And so he was probably knew Wally for years, and he booked some time on a weekend in 1970. And you know, Wally wanted to get people up to this new studio up there, so he made him. I think it was $50 an hour or something ridiculous, and because the going rate was $125 an hour for years. And he brought Chris Huston, who is another great interview you must do sometime. He was in the Undertakers, and at one time more famous than the Beatles, and then he worked for Atlantic Records and did Vanilla Fudge and so forth. Anyway, great engineer. He's now a sound design, room design guy. And he was the engineer, and the whole band, they were rehearsed to the teeth. It was unbelievable. If you want to give an example of the Muse working so well, these guys must have been on a club for a week or 2 weeks or something, just working on the tunes, because almost every take on that record was first or second take, and live vocals. Now just imagine, Spill the Wine, Eric Burden in the booth, tripping his brain out on LSD, doing that whole rap, you know, long hair, evil third gnome bit, and right. Bunch of naked girls. It was, you know, and there was a room. The room was dark. You couldn't see him. You could just hear it, and it was the record. except for a couple of flute overdubs punched in. It was the record. There was so much energy live recording, and when you can nail it like that, and that whole record was like that. It was just bursting with energy. I had some rough mixes that I kept around just to prove that I wasn't dreaming this. It was. They were such a tightly rehearsed and ready, and every member was right there, and nobody left the building. It was just every take was it was an overdub city, which I think is something that kills music, quite frankly.
Why? Why do you say that?
Why do overdubs kill music? Because they're not connected to the mainstream of the event, of the original tracking. So the closer you can get to that original event in time, and you're not phoning in your part. And, certainly on David's record, there was a lot of overdubs. He was doing a lot of stuff himself, which was the only way to do it. And we're basically in Les Paul mode here. But when you have a band like that that's ready to play,
right.
and David will admit to this too, because in Deja Vu, he performed Almost Cut My Hair. And that was 100% live. 100%. It was, my drop-dead moment in those sessions, actually, because he just nailed it. And he did the same thing with Cowboy Movie in his solo record. That live energy is something that David loves to harness. And he's not doing it so much today. I mean, his recent record's great. But I can hear the timeline. The click track is another thing I think that kills music. And it's very convenient for everybody to drop in, and you see your measures right there, right where to punch in. It's much easier for everybody. But I'm telling you, it's not analog versus digital, folks. It's the pretense, and it's the situation, and how things go down. A bunch of humans playing together in a space is far different than. I try to tear down those walls all the time. I have a home studio, but I don't have a window glass, so I have to put up a video link so I can see them. But that helps so much. The communication speeds things along and just gets a better record made. When on David's record, if I could only remember my name, there were no baffles. I didn't even use baffles. I didn't have isolation for everyone, so. Everybody played dynamic. Bill Kreutzman is one of the greatest drummers for that. He was really good with that on American Beauty as well. That we could play the dynamics, so the acoustics had the space to actually work in the room, and just everybody did have headphones, and it just worked.
Can you talk about playing to the dynamics? As a non-musician, this is exactly what I'm trying to get to. I hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Kreutzman exemplifies it on both American Beauty, but can you talk about it to the non-musician out there? Because this is essential.
Okay. The dynamics are what the highs and lows in music, and even in rock music, there can be highs and lows. And every instrument has its space. Acoustic guitar is a quiet instrument. Drums are generally loud instruments, depending on who's playing and how they're playing. You can play quietly on drums, because that's happened in jazz for years.
Mm-hmm.
Jazz combos exist, the bass is right there. So people that have had education in percussion don't have to play loud to get their sounds, because they're playing with brushes or they're doing something else. And Bill found a way to work around the acoustics and fit the dynamic of the instrument in real space. You could put the drums in a booth, and he could be going around and hitting the toms and making all kinds of noise, and it wouldn't leak into the guitars. But then is he playing in the proper dynamic space to fit the guitars? When you put it back together to mix, then you found you have to compress it, and you have to do all this stuff to make those drums fit. When he's playing in the room, then it's automatically, and same for vocals done in the room, the dynamics just work. And mixing becomes almost a ruler mix if you've got your levels set up. You can just put your faders up in a row. And Al Schmidt will tell you this. I think that's what he likes to achieve is pretty much a ruler mix. When you get your faders lined up, and then you let the music, people who have to ride the fader all the time on different things, and it's either because the stuff is overdubbed and the dynamic space is lost among the tracks because they're from a different time and the headphone mix was different, or or they have to because it wasn't recorded properly. One of the two. If it was live and it wasn't recorded properly, the levels are all over the place. That's one thing. But overdubbing puts the music in, and sometimes people would compress the signal going to tape to get a better lower noise and to get kind of a sound, but that affects the vocal, and even the headphone mix is incredibly, when you put yourself in a recording situation where you have to wear headphones for somebody's in isolation where it's an acoustic, you can't hear it, you got to hear the attack. You got it when you do overdubs at different times. You got to make sure you get the headphone mix kind of the same, or the playing is going to be different. And the headphone mix for a singer is super critical. By how much they hear themselves in the phone, you can make them sharp or flat just from the headphone mix. I can dial it in. Mm-hmm. I can say, I don't even have to tell them they're sharp or flat. I'll know they're good singers. I know what they're hearing. So, it's stuff like that. But dynamics are it. It's what's missing from modern music when they crush the peaks in the so-called hyper-compression loudness wars. You hear a Madonna record today or Beyonce, there are no dynamics. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And you listen to a kind of blue, dynamics. Now rock and roll, you can still have dynamics, and so that's what I tried to build in David's record. Not try, it's just the music demanded it, that it had those dynamics, and I think that's what creates the space and makes people like that record.
Well, let's take a listen to this piece of music. We'll investigate the dynamics, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Barncard, what do you got for us there, brother?
Good choice. That is, I'm so glad you played that. That is my favorite cut on there on Down Home by Seals and Crofts, and I actually listened to it recently, and I said, "Whoa! Did I really push the lead guitar on that?" John Hall is just blazing out of that. Now, this is another example of guys playing live together in a room. I didn't even have a booth to use for this one. This was Studio D at Hyder's in San Francisco. And John Simon, bless his heart, man, one of the great producers, always did his stuff live with an 8-track. The first 3 band records were done in home studios with 8 tracks and equipment brought in. And so he was definitely loved the 8-track format. Both he and David Briggs actually loved 8-track. And when I started this Seals and Crofts session, it was going to 8-track, and the guy that was doing the sessions just got overwhelmed. His name is Marty Cohn, a great A&R dude. Mm-hmm. Warner Brothers, you may have heard of him. Brother of Bruce Cohn, manager of the Doobie Brothers, who also turned me on to the Doobie Brothers project. And a great guy, and loved him for years. He really was kind of like my mentor. He really was the guy that turned me on to a lot of things. And he couldn't handle it, so he brought me in and introduced me to John Simon. And then John Simon got enough confidence in me that he was able to go out and play piano, which, graced that record all over the place with Gabriel and a bunch of other tunes. He's fantastic.
I mean, I just wanted to, John and I did an incredible interview that I'll send you. I mean, just to know that I've sort of settled into this area philosophically of people that I can connect with and they can articulate this kind of stuff. I mean, it's very important because what you're trying to say is like, a lot of cats talk to me about Elvin Jones. Elvin played brushes all night if he wanted. Mm-hmm. Just play brushes and be happy doing that. Like, and you're talking about dynamics. This is what you look up on Wikipedia, Seals and Crofts, pop rock, soft rock. I mean, there are dynamics and nuances and nice aesthetics that made the rock music flow, and that's gone now. That you don't hear, and that's just the ability to have individual people come in, whether it's using African percussion, John Simon on that art, whatever he was playing, that organ or piano. You have been part of you were part of the most magical period of spontaneous music that ultimately got put onto record. And I wonder when you if you could talk a little bit about the first time when you sort of said, this is a trend. I don't like this trend. It's not healthy for holistic music.
Okay. Well, I've been working with really good cats and studio musicians in the section. All those guys are all my friends, man. You've interviewed them all now, and I just reunited with Danny at an A&M reunion.
Awesome.
A while ago, and he's such a great guy.
I haven't gotten to Durgie yet, though. I will, though.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Craig's got his own story, so ask him about the helicopter trip. Anyway,
I will.
I think it all kind of came to a head when I arrived I worked at Village Recorders in West LA a couple of times. And when I first came to California, and then later in 1975 when I returned to LA, and I had started as a staff member. I was getting $250 a week, a big cut and pay, and Supertramp was in there. And they're getting ready to cut Breakfast in America, and they were in Studio A in the back, in the Steely Dan room. And I was told that they had been working on the snare drum sound for 3 weeks. Oh, yeah. And I'm going, why? That is incredibly indulgent. So I think that was the beginning where I said, hold on here, this is ridiculous. And then I went on to do all the Crosby Nash records, were mostly live tracking, and then months of overdub vocals, because those vocals were worked out in the studio in Complex, and that was a whole other kind of level of thing. But that wasn't what I was talking about. It was the kind of lunacy, almost designed to just eat up studio time. I mean,
Right.
studios loved
Right.
it.
Right.
Indulgence.
This is very important.
I was sickened by it. And the budget, when I worked for Elektra eventually, I would see these $200,000 budgets as routine. And I never spent $200,000 on any record except maybe the Crosby and Nash ones. But, they earned the right to be indulgent. But these were new bands, like, the ones that they just recently signed that nobody ever heard of. We're getting $150,000, $200,000 with strange entries for $40,000 for food and quote unquote. And it was sickening. That was really when it hit me as being an R guy and actually looking at the spreadsheets of what things were costing and what was coming out of those sessions. But I would say that was the beginning when it really hit me. And then the indulgence of the Grateful Dead were beginning in the Blues for Allah. But they again still tried. They were still their main thing was live. So
right.
I think they had tried to attain that. It was harder in a small room, and Weir Studio had its problems. It really wasn't built for a big band. It was supposed to be a rehearsal place.
We're only doing part one here with a heavy individual, and I'm just so. Just focusing on that point, even though you were an engineer and you were helping to facilitate the music, by giving all the musicians, especially unknown quantity, people that were unknowns, how do you think it affected the musician? Because to me, if you're working on a snare drum part for 3 weeks, you're going after some kind of perfection that is absolutely unattainable. I don't even know what that term is. But how did it affect the musician by giving them that kind of unneeded time?
I think some good drummers don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. That sounds like amateur night to me. A drummer that's never happy with his drum sound because he doesn't know how to tune his drums. You get guys like Keltner or Russell. They just walk in and their drums are ready. They're tuned. They're just ready to go. So there was a disconnect between the band guys who got the right to play drums because they were in the band, and then there was more muscle flexing, I think, with the band thing as the 70s wore on, and less substitutions of studio drummers, and perhaps that was part of it. But I don't. Am I off topic here?
You're waxing poetic. No, let's just as we wrap here, talk about a current project you're working on.
Okay. I just finished this over several months here. This because we were working remotely. This band called from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, called Dead Horses. a bunch of really sweet people from really young, like 21, 23, badass bluegrass players from Heartland, and
Wow.
they saved up their money, and they wanted me, and they wanted to work at Hyde Street, which was the former Wally Hiders, where I did all those records. And so they enlisted the help of Jack Kreutzman, who was an engineer there, who called me and brought me into the project, and it was sheer joy. We didn't get enough time for the tracking, but in 3 days we laid down all the tracks, got all the vocals, maybe by 6 days, I guess, for the rest of the vocals. And then they went back to Wisconsin, and then Jack and I mixed it, and we did the whole thing using Facebook and the net and the special players I made up and my streaming feature, which I'll tell you about someday. I can stream the mix directly to the clients and so on.
Well, Stephen, we're running out. I'm going to reach out to you, and we'll get to part two. I want to thank you for, this is absolutely essential for younger generations, man. So I'll talk to you really soon. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Jake.
Talk to you soon. We'll see you next week. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Peace.
A gig.
And ain't got no money, or no gig, whatever you call it. You ain't got nothing but the blues no way, baby. Or either the old lady gonna do yagging you and arguing with you. Tell you what you get up and do
46, while number 9 Kansas is about to polish off Kansas State.
Down the corner to Selden. He'll drive, shoot, and miss. But tip in his own miss. What an athletic play by